All right. Hello, everybody. And so, kind of not well set up here. Give me a second. Sorry. All right. So I see I've got Brad is there. Sweet. Let's see who else shows up. What do you got? 43 people. All right. We got people in the chat. So welcome to the April Q&A. It is Holy Week. And so here we are. This Holy Week is very strange with COVID and everything. My own parish is struggling just to celebrate. We're struggling. So I'm actually going to be going to 2 different parishes during Holy Week to be able to do the different services. But that's how it is. This Lent has, anybody who follows me on Twitter will know that this Lent has been not the best Lent. You can tell how I'm doing just by social media. If I'm like posting cocky stuff and being a jerk on social media, it usually means that I'm not doing very well. So, all right. So a few things before we start. Last month, first thing is last month I raffled off a few things and I didn't send them yet. And so I said that if I haven't sent them yet, I'm not going to raffle off 2 more t-shirts, 2 more shirts until I send them. And so I should be able to send them soon. I just haven't, but the emails are out. And so the people, so I will send them soon. So sorry to those people who won last month and have been waiting to be contacted by me. Yeah, like I said, this whole month, but that's okay. All right. So what's the other thing? Yes, the other thing is that last month I totally forgot Subscribestar in terms of the questions. And so I will be starting with Subscribestar this month to compensate for that. And so, yeah. All right, so we will get through this. Is there anything else I need to announce? I don't know. All right, so I will start with Subscribestar. Okay, so from last month, so the way it works, sorry, for people who are the first time in the Q&A, the way it works is that if for people who are supporting me on Patreon for like $10 or more, you get to ask questions in advance. And so all these are the questions I'm going to go through. And then at the end, I will go through the super chats and answer those questions. And so I usually do have time to get through everything. It's hard for me to pay attention to the chat because usually even just answering the questions from the different platforms, it ends up being like 2 hours long. So yeah. So if you want, I mean, I am trying to do some surprise streams once in a while now. If you notice some carving streams, I will do more. And so then in those kind of surprise streams, it's easier to ask questions and I can pay attention to the chat more because it's more kind of improvised. So pay attention to those if you want, but I can't tell you when they're going to be because I don't know when they're going to be. All right, so here we go with Subscribestar from last month. So XRD asks, would you say there's a connection between vegans and Cain in their seeming unwillingness to make the right sacrifices? I don't want to pick on vegans, but after seeing recent stories of parents who force veganism on their children, and how these kids end up severely malnourished, some even dying, by the time authorities get to them, I've begun wondering where veganism fits in all of this. So it's one of those interesting things that, so at least like vegetarianism, let's say, monks are vegetarian. So Orthodox monks don't eat meat in theory. I'm sure in practice it happens once in a while, but in theory they don't eat meat. And also there's a notion in scripture that people didn't eat meat before the fall, not just before the fall, but actually they weren't supposed to eat meat before the flood. And that's why after the flood, it says that God gave permission that people eat meat without the blood. And so you had to bleed the animal in order to eat it. And so there's a sense in which eating animals is a kind of condescension of the fall on one hand. But on the other hand, there's also something about it which how can I say this? It's kind of like you have to not see it necessarily as good or bad, but you do have to see it as a kind of condescension of the fall. And so I think that eating meat is fine. I don't think that there's anything wrong with it. But I think and just like I also think that it's okay for soldiers to go to war and to fight off enemies in terms of when a country is being attacked by foreign invaders. But I think that all of these things are kind of condescensions to the fall, let's say. And so, but it's not the same as veganism, because I don't think in scripture there's any sense that people were vegan. Rather just vegetarian. And so, because even in the story of Cain and Abel, it would be very odd to think they weren't supposed to eat meat. And so in theory, Abel didn't eat meat according to the story, but he still had animals. And so what were their animals for if he's not going to eat their meat? And so milk, cheese, I don't know, wool. So they did use animals, just not in the story. They did use animals, just not eat the meat. Yeah. All right. So that was the only question on Subscribestar in March. So let's go to see if there are any questions. So there are no questions in April. Okay. So you know what? There is one. I'm going to be I'll be nice. So Big Lasagna on Subscribestar asked, I've noticed that the more I learned about symbolism, the more my humor got better. I've read some articles that people 100 years ago laughed about 50 minutes a day. Nowadays, it's about 5 minutes. Does this make sense to you? I don't know. I mean, I think that I do think that there was definitely, in traditional societies, there was definitely just more joy in general. We have this weird image, like in movies and stuff, about these dark traditional societies, but in reality, because they were together, because they would just spend all their time together, they would probably, you're right, they probably would laugh more because they were just together. It's, if you're alone, you don't laugh unless you're watching some funny movie. But even then, like, you wouldn't laugh out loud as much as you would when you're with people and you're kind of with friends and stuff. So it's possible. But it's good to have a sense of humor if you understand symbolism, because if not, it can actually take you to a very dark place. So, you guys know that I laugh all the time for bad reasons, but it's probably good. It's probably good for me. All right, man, I'm in a weird mood. This might not go well. I hope it'll be okay. All right, so let's move on to the Symbolic World website. Just to remind you guys, as you know, the Symbolic World website is being redone right now, and so I'm working, actually even redoing the logos and just the whole aspect of it and how it's going to integrate the different things that I'm working on, but not just me, also all the other people involved in the Symbolic World. So that's coming soon. We will also have a platform for discussion there, because right now the Facebook group is still hanging on, but we all feel like it's just a question of time before even the Facebook group gets shut down, because some of the posts are getting shut down. And so it's just a question of time. Yeah. All right. All right. So CS Streetzel or C Streetzel asks, can you explore the symbolism in the story of Samson? You mentioned him moving the doorway to a hill, and there is the lion and Hundi event as well. Is he a Nephilim? No, he's not a Nephilim. He's definitely, his symbolism is related to symbolism of Nephilim, in the sense that because he's an Israelite who is attracted to foreign women, who has relationships with foreign women, then there is a relationship with the idea of Nephilim, or this idea of like the people higher up on the mountain going down the mountain to get potential from that which is impure, or that which is not in your level of identity. And so that's what happens in the Genesis story, but from angels to men. But you can understand it at different levels, right? So the different warnings that, for example, are given by Solomon about going to the strange woman, and he says the feet of the strange women goes down into Sheol. So her feet go down into hell. And so this is this idea of like this idea of that which you don't know being kind of on another plane as you, and you have to be careful because it can you can waste your seed, right? Your seed could be lost in the darkness, let's say. So that is one of the aspects of the symbolism of Samson. But there's also a mystery, which is that it's like, how do you flip that? How do you make it total? Because ultimately we believe that God is the God of all things. And so how does that turn? Like, there's a reality to the symbol, to the structure, but then there's also a way in which even that aspect or the strange has to be saved. And that's what happens with Christ, because Christ, the story of Christ with the Samaritan is all about that. The story of Christ with the Samaritan is all about Christ going towards the strange woman and marrying the strange woman, and that's why, like I said many times, that's why Christ marries Rome. That's why Christ saves Rome, because he is, in a way, he's marrying the daughters of Cain. Like, he's marrying Cain. Rome is Cain. Are the descendants of Cain in terms of what they mean. And so there's an aspect of the symbolism of Christ which resembles the symbolism of the Nephilim. Just like this idea that one of the interpretations of the symbolism of the Nephilim is that the daughters of the sons of Seth married the daughters of Cain. Well, that's what Christ is doing. Christ is marrying Cain, but he does it in a way that doesn't fall. He's able to do it without falling. He's able to kind of gather all of this strangeness into himself and transform it. So it's not the same. It's almost like one of the aspects of what Christ is doing is healing the rift of the first chapters of Genesis, like healing those different rifts and those different problems. So, all right, I need to not spend too much time on each question, or else I'm never going to get through. All right. All right. So Josh the Mover asks, "Hello, Jonathan. A quick question of validity. After careful consideration and prayer, I've elected to take St. John of Damascus as my patron saint when I'm baptized." Well, congratulations, Josh. That's awesome. At some point, I would like to commission a diptych with Saint Damascene on the left and the three hands icon of the Theotokos on the right. Would this be considered a violation of any iconographical rules? Would it be more correct to have them commissioned as separate icons? I've not seen a diptych with those icons together before. I don't want to be in any way innovative. So it's fine to have icons with different saints, and have them like in a line or have them related to each other. You see that in kind of what's called family icons that people would commission. So that's fine. The problem is mostly you have to be careful when you make an icon of the Mother of God. You don't want, because in a way she is kind of the summit of sanctity in the human level. And so I'm not sure I've ever seen an image where she is just kind of facing another saint besides St. John the Foreigner or St. John the theologian. So I'm not sure. I'd have to think about it. And also, I mean, you could just have them made as two different icons. I mean, it wouldn't be that difficult to just have the two panels, and then you can put them up the way you want. Maybe that could just be an easy solution to avoid any confusion. All right, so In the Wounds asks, "Hi, Jonathan. Any advice on navigating the symbolic worldview with kids, especially a very literal-minded 5-year-old? He loves folktales, myths, Bible stories, and we talk about the deep patterns in them, but he often returns to, but did this really happen? Is the hero plays character real?" I would say, like, especially for a 5-year-old, like, you should just tell them the stories and not interpret them. Like, there's no point in interpreting the stories for a 5-year-old. You just tell them the stories, and then you don't need to go any further than that. The interpretation will come later. So if you just tell the stories and you kind of rejoice in the stories, at some point, maybe you can avoid the question of, did this really happen? I would say for sure, in terms of fairy tales, you can say that it's easy then to say no, that it didn't really happen in this way that you think. In terms of scripture, I would just answer yes to all the stories. And in terms of saint stories, I would just also answer yes to all the stories. So that's how I would do it. So you could always answer it happened once upon a time. You could just answer that. All right. So Adam says, hey, Jonathan, you seem to have a grasp on how 2020 would go and have predictions for 2021. So when will Jacob and Esau meet? Yeah, I can't answer that one, when Jacob and Esau meet. As for 2021, I mean, it's pretty much on route for just being a continuation of the clampdown mode. And so that seems to be what's on the menu. Just a continuation of last year, I think. And also just making it acceptable, like just making everybody just accept that this is the new normal, as they say, or this is the inevitable. Yeah. All right. So Numayesh asks, is Solomon the prefiguring of Christ? Joseph and King David have a lot of relevance to the story of Christ, but Solomon also seems to be relevant too. I've noticed he appears to be an eschatological figure where all the rebellions are put down. There's peace in the land. The temple is built and he rules as the wise king, and all the nations of the world come to honor him. Yes, of course. Exactly. And I think I don't even have to answer. The Song of Songs is usually attributed to him as well. Sounds like the eschaton to me. And so I think you're right. I almost don't have to answer. I almost don't have to answer your question. So he's a prefiguring of Christ in that. You could say that he is, yeah, definitely in terms of the idea of peace and the idea of the temple, and also the idea of the Queen of Sheba, of his relationship with the ends of the earth, you would say, like the Queen of Sheba coming to kind of ask questions of him is something like the wise men coming to worship Christ. And so there's this idea that he connected to the ends of the earth. All the characters in scripture are prefigurations of Christ. That one's actually an easier one. Some of them are harder. Some of them are, like Samson is a harder one in terms of understanding how, but they all are. All right, so Luca Askovic asks, in chapter 35, Symbols of Space and Time, Foundations Stone and Scandal Stone, in my brother's book, The Language of Creation, your brother quotes the Bible. With wisdom, the Lord founded the earth. With understanding, he established the heavens. Later in the chapter, he quotes, with wisdom, a house is built. With understanding, it is established. With knowledge, its rooms are filled. I'm struggling to understand what these sentences mean. What do wisdom, understanding, and knowledge mean in this context? I'm not going to answer that, man, because it's like pretty much that you could say that that kind of stuff is exactly what that's exactly what the book is about. But a little thing you could understand, for example, in terms of understanding the idea of wisdom founding the earth and understanding establishing the heavens, you need to this is one of the things that you talk about all the time, is this cross thing happened, where with wisdom from above he founds the earth below, and then with understanding from below he creates a foundation, he establishes a solid ground for the heavens. And so just for example, then understanding that can help you understand this relationship between the invisible and the visible, how one of them provides form, for that which is below, and that which is below provides support, and let's say making explicit of that which is above. And so maybe that's the best way to understand that. So you can understand like wisdom and understanding, and then knowledge as the union of the two. That's probably the best way to understand it. So wisdom is like the seed. Understanding is like the explicit aspect of it, And so the difference between the wisdom of a car, like knowing what it's for, and the understanding of a car, how it works, like in terms of the mechanisms of the car, and then with knowledge, that's how you fill the car with knowledge. you use the car. So when you're using the car, you need to have this basic notion of how the car works in terms of what it can do and what it can't do, the purpose of the car, the pattern of the car in terms of its spiritual purpose and reason, and then you can use the car. So I hope that makes sense. I hope that helpful. This stuff is it's hard to talk about. I also don't want to put words in my brother's mouth, but that's how I would understand it. All right. Okay, so David Flores asks, with the human-animal hybrid news coming out, I can't help but see the human-animal gods of Egypt and other cultures. You have already mentioned that AI has patterns of an idol. If AI is an idol made of gold and silver, what does the human-animal hybrid idol of flesh and bone mean? Is it the same as centaurs or something entirely different? It's very close. The idea of the animal-human hybrid is very close to the centaurs and the satyrs in ancient mythological thinking. A really good way to understand what human-animal hybrids are. So they're like an abasing of humanity, right? And you can see that even in terms of the ethical problems that people are seeing with this hybridization or this making of chimeras, they understand that there's a danger of creating a lower caste of humans, and so of a human that is more basic, that is more flesh, you would say, in terms of spiritual understanding. And so that's what these hybrids are, and even in mythological thinking. So the centaur, for example, like in Greek myth and in Roman stories, the centaur is constantly trying to like rape women. He's constantly trying to like steal, like all the stories of the centaur is like stealing Hercules' wife. There's this big story about how a centaur says he's going to cross. So if you know the story of Saint Christopher, you can see it's related actually. So Hercules is on one side of a river, and the centaur comes and says, "I will carry your wife across the river for you." And so this beast, like a boat, like a support, is capable of carrying, like an ark, you could say, is able to carry the Hercules' wife across the river. But now, different from, let's say, St. Christopher, different from the ark with the animals in it, when the centaur comes to the other side, he's like going to run away with her, and he's going to take her with him. And so she's going to be lost, you could say. And so the story usually has it that Hercules shoots an arrow. So you can see like the kind of the masculine or the order reaffirming itself. He shoots an arrow across, and then he kills the centaur in order to be able to get his wife back. So you can see how these stories, like these patterns, they play out in different ways. It's the same pattern, but it just plays out in different ways. So that's mostly the way to understand the problem of the animal-human hybrid, is that it's kind of a lowering of humanity. In terms of the human, like the human animal gods of Egypt, it's more about totemizing. So it's more about seeing the things in the world and how their patterns manifest certain realities, and then kind of elevating that in its pattern form. And so so it's kind of like, I mean, you could say something like, the god of rain. So rain is a natural phenomena, but it has a pattern. It has patterns. It comes and goes in certain patterns. And so you can totemize that and then have a god of rain. But you can do the same with animals. And so certain characteristics of animals will manifest certain realities. And then that's how you get these animal-human hybrids. So it's probably the best way to understand that. And and that's a negative version, but there's a positive version, which is the tetramorph, right? In the tetramorph, you have also these animals that are brought up into their pattern, and they kind of manifest different aspects of divinity in the tetramorph. So you don't worship the tetramorph, you don't sacrifice to the cherubs, but the type of symbolism that they're engaging with is similar to the symbolism that will give you these kind of gods with animal heads. Okay, but like I said, it's not the same. You don't worship them, but it's similar in terms of what it's doing with the images of the animals. All right, and so Arosa77 says, this is a question about contextualizing the Christian message in missions to non-Christian people. Coming from a low church Protestant tradition, I'm increasingly appreciative of Big T tradition. It seems to me that tradition is the product of contextualizing gospel originality, a message revealed within the interaction of Semitic and Hellenistic worlds in Palestine to other ancient cultures. Contemporary, especially Protestant missions, values contextualization efforts that include attempts to shed as much cultural baggage of the missionary before engaging in the target mission culture, and this will almost be by necessity lead to a shedding of tradition. What are the losses when Christians, missionaries plant new churches without a reference to ancient tradition, be it in liturgy, history, devotional practice for the laity, etc.? And so, I mean, there's a difficulty, of course, in losing. It's a game. Like it definitely is a difficult game to play. And it's also one that honestly usually will just play out in a long term. And that's one of the things we struggle because we don't have the patience anymore to deal with a kind of a long-term story. So for sure, in terms of the idea of stripping down the traditions, you have to be careful because, you know, Christ embodies himself in things, like he embodies himself in particulars. And so if you try to just remove them, you can end up with something which is not really Christianity. But it's but like I said, it's a tricky game. Like it's you can look at the way it happened in like Russia and Bulgaria and how the Orthodox evangelized different peoples, is that at first probably the Orthodoxy in Russia, they translated into their language. And it does seem like, for example, they let happen certain things, like certain analogies people saw between their ancient gods and the new characters, like the saints and with Christ. And so they weren't afraid of saying, of helping people see through their own tradition, you know, what it is that Christianity was talking about, you know. And so that seems to have happened also, like in terms of evangelizing the northern people. There's a danger there too, which is you can also kind of misstep and then end up with weird kind of syncretism. But yeah, I'm happy that I don't have to make a lot of those decisions, because it must be very difficult to kind of find that balance. All right, so Alphonse asks, dear Mr. Pajot, my question maybe would be, are we in the start or middle of a new wave of Gnosticism? Gnosticism is like Christianity on mushrooms, Dog Metzger. Yeah. So what's going on in this coming age of Aquarius? I don't. Yeah. Joe DMT Rogan on meditating. Sam Harris, who also documented his mushroom trip. Is wokeism another form of trying to get redemption and salvation through certain kinds of rules and behaviors and rituals? Would you like to elaborate your thoughts on Gnosticism, the critic of the church fathers, and how to avoid a mix-up of symbolism with certain Gnostic ideas? Like IG, the truth of the existence of angels, demons, heavens, and so on. So the biggest problem with Gnosticism is really one big problem, and most of the lower problems emanate. I use that word. It's hilarious talking about Gnosticism. Like the lower problems will be connected to the higher problem, and the higher problem of Gnosticism is mostly the idea that that the lowest God created the world, and that the world itself is a kind of is fallen in its very origin, and that the supreme, let's say, the infinite, or the highest infinite principle does not have any contact at all with anything below him. It's like this completely self-looking monad. It's a monad, right? And so Christianity doesn't present a monad as the infinite, but a trinity. And so already in the infinite, there's a sense in which multiplicity and a certain dynamism is part of infinity itself. And that avoids a lot of problems. And so Gnosticism always ends up being some kind of idea that the world itself is fallen. And so you need to be able, through different different acts of meaning, through rituals, but rituals as like keys, as these like secret keys that you can unlock doors and then ascend this hierarchy of heaven in order to free yourself from this corrupt world and corrupt body. And that is not at all what Christianity is. Christianity is about embodiment and about incarnation. And although is suspect to people who are a slave to their passions or a slave to their bodies, it's clear from the very beginning that Christianity is not against the body, and its rituals are not there to make you escape from reality, but is there to integrate reality and to participate in the fullest sense in reality. So if you look at the Orthodox communion and the Orthodox liturgy, you'll see there are references to angels all through the liturgy. And it talks, for example, about Christ being carried by the orders of angels down into the communion. And so there is this sense that there is this descent, but there's also other places where it talks about we who represent the cherubim, like we who are becoming analogous to the angels at our level and participating in this giant pattern. And so there isn't a sense that we have initiation rituals in order to escape the world, but rather to kind of have a full experience of what creation is. So that's probably the best way that I could talk about that. All right, it's from Mikhail. So what is your opinion on abstract icons? Malevich treated his black square as a sort of icon. He kept hanging it high in a room's corner as if it were an Orthodox artifact. Nowadays, the image is practically treated as an icon of art, as if art was a spiritual being to be worshipped. Recently, I saw an exhibition of modern semi-abstract Orthodox art. Some of them were really moving in a good way. You could say that traditional icons are an abstract art anyway. So it depends. So this is a great discussion that's happening right now in, let's say, in Orthodoxy. So you could actually see that Malevich's black square, his supremacist icon, is something of Gnosticism. Like there's something about the desire to reduce the world to just patterns. And so it's like, hey, I'm for patterns, right? I love patterns. That's what I talk about all the time. But the patterns have to be embodied. They're not, you don't have access. I mean, you can have access to the pure pattern, but it always manifests itself in an embodied form. And so abstract art is there's something about it which is dehumanizing, and something about it which is alienating to the human person. And so let's say one of the tendencies in the modern times has been to, because some of the abstract artists, this is a complicated question, but some of the abstract artists, especially Maurice Denis, who is a modern Catholic artist, and there was part of this kind of weird modern Catholic revival of art. He saw him, and not just him, but other theorists saw icons as being the route in terms of abstraction towards modern abstract art. But I think that that's a problematic understanding, because you could say in a way that traditional icons are less fleshy than Renaissance art, less kind of passionate than Baroque art, let's say. But to say that the Orthodox icon is more abstract is to act as if the fleshiness of Baroque art and of kind of Romanticism or academic art is more real, is more embodied. And that's not right. You know, that embodiment doesn't mean the fleshy passions, right? There's a balance in the Christian body, you would say. And I think that the icons try to manifest that balance, that sober balance, you could say, of the body. So that's what I think. What time is it? 9:30. All right. So Nelson, Justin, Evan ask, how should an Orthodox Christian rightly order their finances? How are you asking me questions like that? Do you have any big picture suggestion about how to handle money in a spiritually responsible way? Example, how to plan retirement without credit interest. Can luxury purchases be justified? Man, you guys, this is not, you should ask your priest a question like that. I mean, I think that you have to, like, I can just tell you the way that I've done it, and my wife and I have always done it, is we've always just been very grateful for whatever it is that we have, and we've been very poor, and we've also been more fortunate in certain times, and so we just go at it one step at a time. And to be honest, I don't have investments, and I'm not saying that that's the way to go. I'm not saying that that's the way to do things, but it's both of us, both my wife and I, have a sense that that's not the best thing you can do with your money, is like invest. Of course, if you're just going to squander it, then that's not better. But I think I think that it's. I don't think there's one way to go about it. I think that you just have to be attentive to the way that God kind of presents this possibility to you in your life, and be attentive to what's going on around you, to the questions around you, to the needs around you, and just act based on that. But I'm not against investment, and I'm not like, I don't think it's wrong. I also like the idea of luxury purchases is a complicated one, because it's a relative thing. All right. Okay. So Blank asks, okay, Blank. So how do could you discuss the symbolism of the two witnesses in Revelation? How should we understand them in terms of the end of the world, specifically the end of the world we're in? I've heard in Protestant circles that they are related to John the Baptist, Elijah, and Enoch. Do you think this is accurate or no? I think that attribution to John the Baptist, Elijah, Enoch is a pretty universal one. I don't think that I think that it comes from the church fathers. I don't remember exactly who, but I think it's a very ancient understanding of the witnesses. And I mean, it has to do with the idea of those which were taken up, those that were taken up without dying. And so that's mostly the idea of there's a pattern that kind of at the end of a world, there are these characters that are taken up, and then before a change, it's kind of like at the end, things kind of separate, and there's a moment of transition, and there are certain elements which go up, let's say. And that's what Enoch is. That's also what Elijah is. That's why there's, in the Elijah story, the Enoch story, there's the flood. And then in the Elijah story, there's also the crossing of the river with the garments of skin. And so that's trying to show you that this is a transition, that then Elisha is going to start a new world. And Elisha starting a new world, there's a lot of his miracles that are there to show you that he's starting a new world, like raising the axe head. And, there are these different miracles that are there to show that. And Moses is the same too, right? So Moses dies, but his body is taken up. So yeah, that's usually the way that it's understood. And so the idea is that you could say that these witnesses will appear at the end, before the end of the world. And so there's a sense, like, you could understand it, you could understand it the way that Christ said of John the Baptist, that he is the Elijah that will come. So you could understand that before the end, there will be Elijah that will come. There will be an Enoch. There will be, another John the Baptist that will manifest before the end. So, all right. So Christian asks, what is your experience with tarot cards? And do you think it is okay for Christians to use them for symbolic purposes? I don't really have any experience with tarot cards. I would say it's probably best to avoid them, especially avoid people who are using them, because people do use them as a kind of weird, divination. And there is warnings in scripture against divination, and the tradition against that type of action. You can understand why it's dangerous to want to devise your future, or to want to use pattern understanding as a way to give yourself power towards your future. And so that's a dangerous game to play. And the thing about it is that it's probably not completely hogwash, which is why it's dangerous to play with those games. So if you want to kind of just look at tarot cards and try to understand, because they're certainly using some patterns that are connected to something. Like they're not arbitrary. But I would say just to be careful, because it's a dangerous road to get on. All right, so VSAC 2008 says, "Hi Jonathan, I've been reflected on liturgical circumvolutions. They seem to define sacred space, great insensation at the beginning of liturgies, established center, singing, transform the world." So these different cycles of sensing, and symbolize sacred transformations. The direction does not seem arbitrary, sometimes clockwise, sometimes counterclockwise. Could it have something to do with symbolism of the right and left? Or could it refer to cosmic symbolism, sunwise connection, or even interplay of both? I'll be totally honest with you. I've been thinking about that a long time in terms of how it works in the liturgy and how the processions work in the liturgy. And also I think your intuition is very good in the sense that there seems to be, in the way that the Christian church is set up, an interplay between two symbolisms. One is left and right hand, and then the other is north, south, east, west. And so the left side, so if you're in a church and you're facing east, right, the left side is north. So the left side is dark, and the right side is south. And so the right side is light. And so there seems to be something of that in the way that even you can see, if you look at medieval churches, the way that they would decorate the churches, they definitely were taking that into account. And so the northern transept would often be like the dark transept. And so they would have weird symbolisms in the northern transept. For example, I think it's in Notre Dame or in Chartres. I'm not sure which one. They have all the weird stories in the northern transept. They have all the foreigners, all the strangers in the Old Testament. They have the story of the ox cart with the golden hemorrhoids, all the weirdness, like all that kind of loose symbolism of something which is kind of loose and not attached to the center. The righteous strangers, you would say, and all these other kind of strange stories. And then the south side, then there'll be more like New Testament stuff and everything. So they're definitely something about that in terms of, and so the idea of like coming out in the north, like that the origin of the sun, even the origin of the sun is in the north. Like that's something that's hard for people to understand. The sun comes up in the east, but it's like the seed of the sun is down in darkness, right? It's hidden in the darkness. And so the idea that the origin is in the north, but it reveals itself in the east, right? And so you can see that how that would be like this kind of procession from north, but it doesn't totally, like, it doesn't completely jive to me. So I probably shouldn't be talking about that. But it's something I'm still thinking about. I've been thinking about for 20 years or whatever. All right. So Timothy Aspaslaw says, "Hey, Jonathan, what is a good way to help someone understand or experience what René Guénon calls super rational?" That's what when we talk about the nous, that's what we're talking about. It's the idea of direct intuition. And so you experience that all the time. Like you experience super rational all the time. It's just that we're not used to understanding those experiences. Every time you experience unity in anything, you're experiencing something which is super rational, in the sense that the rational can analyze the parts, but it can never jump to the unity. And so unity is always super rational. But then once you have the unities, then you can do it again, right? So it's like you can analyze the parts of the chair, and then you jump up to the chair. And then once you have chairs and other things, you can analyze those and then jump up to higher categories. And so that's what it is. And so imagine that like in yourself, where you have all your thoughts and you have all your passions and all your desires and all your multiple personalities and all of that. And then once in a while, you can have this glimpse of something which unites it all together. And it's beyond thought, and it's like a direct experience. It's beyond analyzing it. So that's probably the best way to understand it, is to see how we actually experience that. We actually experience that quite a bit. Like, we just don't recognize it. So, all right. So I'm moving now on to Patreon, and getting a little glance at the chat. I'm happy to see that Neil from Dirt for Robbins is there. Sweet. And Symbolic Memes is there. Always funny stuff. Lisa's there. Cool. All right. So yeah, happy to see everybody in there. Thiago is there. Nice. Was on your channel. Look at me going through the chat. I'm becoming a real YouTuber after 4 years of doing this. All right. And so Dirt for Robin says Symbolic Memes is the best. Yeah, the memes are hilarious. They also work on like often work on like several levels, and I'm like, man, he's really thinking this stuff out. Okay, so let's go into Patreon. All right, so Jason, and we're all curious about who Symbolic Memes is. One day we will discover who you are. It's gonna happen. All right, so Jason, he says, Symbolic Memes, I don't make them, they just manifest themselves. That's hilarious. All right, so Jason Gadewaltz says, how would you describe Virgil in the comedy, Human Reason, a Poet? I think that at least, especially in the comedy, Virgil is playing several roles for Dante. On the one hand, he's playing the role of that which inspired Dante, and so it starts as a personal sense. It's that he is the one that is like Dante's mentor, you could say. And so in that sense. But his mentor, you would say, up to a certain level. And so, yes, he does also represent something like reason, and also something like, for at least for Dante, definitely represents the poet. And so so you have to understand that. So Virgil is Dante's inspiration, but he's really is his inspiration. So not just personally, but in the sense that the descent into the underworld meme, like the descent into the underworld structure, is in the Aeneid, right? It's part of the Aeneid, and it's part of the writings of Virgil. So you can imagine that Virgil would have Homer, kind of guiding him along. And so Dante sees himself as just like Dante is taking Virgil's notion of the descent into the underworld and then joining that with Christianity. Okay, so that's what he's doing, and so that's what's happening in the story. It's like that's also what's happening as Virgil guides Dante up the levels, and then at some point has to stop, and then Dante moves up higher, and ends up with a saint, ends up with now I can't remember his name. That's horrible. Who guides Dante up? The guy who wrote the Templar chart for the Templars. Like I know who he is. I just can't remember. Oh, that's horrible. It's horrible that his name isn't coming to me. All right, well, we continue. So I think that's what it is. It's gonna come to me, and then I'm gonna feel really stupid. All right. So Norm Grondin says, I'm not sure how prevalent the 7 last words of Christ are for Orthodox, but these words as Christ's last sermon placed under the themes of forgiveness. Father, forgive them. Salvation. Today you will be with me. Relationship. Okay, so he goes through all the 7, way heavenly in the Catholic faith. I wonder what sort of symbolic story arc you might see there. Perhaps a summation of his ministry, covenant fulfillment, or even as a resume of the Christian story as a whole. I'd have to think about it. To be honest, I've never thought about the last words of Christ as an arc or as a story. So I'd have to think about it. It's definitely something which sounds plausible at the outset. So I would definitely have to think about it more. All right. So Connor Mitchell says, why does Russia hold almost a mythical boogeyman role in Western society, or at least in the American mindset? I mean, because you need one, I guess. They realized that they need one. They tried to get rid of their boogeyman, and then they realized that they kind of need it, and so we went back to it. The funniest thing about the Russia-US story, there really is like a wisdom in understanding what happened in terms of how things happened. And so you can think about it like in terms of Christianity, let's say. So you can think about how, let's say, after the revolution, especially let's say after World War II during the Cold War, the US were sending missionaries. They would send people with that would smuggle Bibles and would try to inject Christianity into Russia. And then, so there was the secret action, the secret seeds that were being planted in Russia, people bringing Bibles and trying to praying for Russia, praying for the salvation of Russia, this massive kind of attention and movement from Christianity into this dark place that Russia was. And Russia was doing the same, right? Russia was sending their spies over to the US, infiltrating culture, trying to affect popular characters. And let's say you have these theorists, communist theorists that end up becoming very popular in the US institutions and kind of infiltrating US institutions, this whole idea of the long walk to the institutions. And so you have this secret action from the Russians on the Americans. Then you have the secret action from the Americans on the Russians. And then this secret seed grows up, and it makes it that they flip. They switch over. And so all of a sudden America becomes this secular, wasteland, and Russia becomes this new bastion of Christianity. I mean, think about it, how crazy that is, how just nuts that is, that happened in our lives, that we saw that flip happen completely. It's nuts. And so, but it can help you understand how reality works, how it's these secret seeds that we're planting. It's even now, let's say this work that we're doing. I talked about this recently with Paul Vanderklay. This idea that the work that we're doing now, let's say what you guys are doing with me and the Symbolic World people, and it's we're not getting massive attention, and it's probably better we're not. There's a sense in which the work we're doing of re-enchanting the world or helping people see the re-enchantment of the world is this secret work that's happening, and it's gonna grow. It's gonna grow because it is. Right, it is the end of the cycle of disenchantment, and so it's gonna happen. And I think I really do believe that in 10 years or whatever, so a lot of people are going to start to think symbolically and not even know where it comes from. They don't even know, they don't have to. It doesn't matter, but it'll have grown up and it'll have had its fruit. So it's an interesting way to understand how the world works. Sorry, I didn't totally answer your question, but I think I did in a way. All right. So Paul Dumal says, hi, Jonathan. You have mentioned that we should not read too much into dreams. Is it because they are by nature unreliable, or only because the vast majority of us lack the discernment to analyze them? By extension, do you think that all modern psychological theorizing about the meaning of dreams, Freud, Jungian, is worthless? Thank you for your work. So the reason why you don't want to pay too much attention to dreams is that it's kind of so dreams in terms of consciousness, there's something like the waters of chaos. And so consciousness arises out of this water of consciousness. and then goes back into it. So it's like this cycle of awake and sleep. It's the cycle of life and death. It's the cycle of work and Sabbath, right? It's this cycle of light and dark. So the sleep is like a little flood. And I think if you read Matthew's book, you'll see that he talks about that. And so most of dreams are just like chaos. They're just chaotic, and you shouldn't give too much attention to that. And I don't know, like maybe it's just me, but I know some people that pay a lot of attention to their dreams, and there's something unhealthy about that. They end up being, it's almost like they're living in their dreams. It's like they're living in their dreams rather than living in the real world when you're not careful. But the thing about that is, so you can understand, the best way to understand is like, it's like on the water, the lower waters. Okay. And so these lower waters are like these waves and this chaos and this kind of bubbly stuff. But the lower waters are also the place of like a mirror, you could say. And so if the waters are still, let's say, then once in a while, they can become a mirror for higher things. And so that's why people do have real visions in dreams. And so they do have true revelations in dreams. You see it in scripture, you see it in the tradition, you see it all over the place that this happens. But most of the time, because we're not saints, because most of us don't live in prayer with still minds, most of our dreams are just a mess of chaos and of desires that are crossing each other and contradictory things that don't make any sense. And so it's dangerous to pay too much attention to that. So yeah, so that's what I think. And the church fathers, they really warn people against paying too much attention to dreams, for those, I think, for similar reasons, because most of the time it's just chaos. All right. So Dom Palermo says, it is not what goes into a man that defiles the body, but that which comes out. Porn images are not inherently bad, say in the hands of a blind man. This simple frame can be used to assess the question of psychologically coerced DNA treatments. I personally do not condone abortion. Rolling up my sleeve is not a symbolic moment for me. The Pope is relevant. I'm not sure where you're going with this, dude. The Pope is irrelevant. He's not my Pope. Individuals make choices, and identifying with the religious aspects of the meta story or not is a choice. I find this to be a potentially dangerous modern line of presupposition. How can we better show that the participatory actions of the individuals is not separate from the movement of the whole in material action and invisible meaning? I'm not sure. I'm sorry, Dom. I don't totally understand your question. And I'm so sorry about that. All right, so Micah Mueller asks, at certain points from premonitions or heartfelt prayer, I will be struck in the back of the head, a shiver will down my spine, like there was a thought or idea that I was too large to bring to realization. What is the meaning of this from a phenomenological or symbolic perspective? Is it related to the snake sliding down the tree or bird too large to nest? I mean, I understand. I don't know, like in terms of the physiological description, but I mean, I think that we do have these kind of terrifying experiences of connecting to a reality that is bigger than us. So I think that's what you're describing. So I'm not sure though if it has to do with like a snake sliding down the tree. But for sure, I understand what you mean in the sense of suddenly being kind of overwhelmed by a sense of almost like sacred terror. And I think it's good. Like, it's good that happens to us. And it's good if it can help us to understand how bigger the world is and what we're able to perceive. So that's probably good. So Ryan Pinkham says, have you read St. John of Damascus on dragons and ghosts? No, I have not. He seems to be talking about physical animals, beasts. In terms of ghosts? Really? Physical animals? I understand dragon symbolism, but do you think they physically existed? It doesn't seem that crazy to me. And so, of course, dragons existed. I mean, dragons probably exist now. When I talk about dragons have to have an effect on the world, or else people wouldn't talk about them the way they do. What I'm trying to help people understand is that the dragon is a different type of category than just the like regular type of categories that we use. And so you could encounter a dragon, but then someone else might encounter a dragon. It won't be the same dragon. It'll be like another phenomena that will be a dragon. So the dragon is kind of like this unknown monster, this unknown being, this unknown animal, terrifying unknown phenomena, And so I think that people did encounter dragons, and I think people especially encounter dragons when they're in places they've never been before, and they especially encounter dragons when they're in like new lands, or in the out on the ocean, sea monsters and all that stuff. That's where you encounter dragons, when you're in places where there are things that you don't know. There are things crawling underneath that you don't understand. So I hope that makes sense. So it's like I don't think you could ever dissect a dragon and have like a zoological category that you could have dragon DNA. How about that? To say that I don't think dragons are like that. But I do think you can encounter them. That's for sure. I hope that makes sense to you. In reading the Gospels on the Passion, I was struck with the many seemingly arbitrary events that occur in these stories. Could you maybe go into the meaning of Christ not bearing the cross and Simon of Cyrene? Why isn't this part of all the Gospels? I mean, the reason why it's not part of all the Gospels is not as important in understanding, let's say, the mystery of that moment when a character from far away carries the cross of Christ for him. It has to do again with like, it has to do with something like Christ is going to save the foreigners. Christ is going to save Rome. Christ is going to save the Ethiopian eunuch. All these far away characters. That this is actually how it's going to play out. At least that's how I understand it. So Kevin Patterson asks, "Hi, Jonathan. I was touched by your story where a priest crossed himself upon seeing your icon carving for the first time. I want to make such art which participates in divine liturgy as your visual arts do, though I struggle to accept the lower place given to my proclivity towards, let's say, movement arts, music, cinema, stage performance, while in pagan traditions, the shaman would be highly revered for the same role. What is the highest form of these arts? How can these skills participate in the divine liturgy?" I mean, we have this, like it's called, I mean, the priest is moving, the priest is acting, and like acting in the sense of moving in the space and moving in the church. We have processions which move around the buildings, and the organization of those movements can be very touching. A good procession, a beautiful procession, can be really transforming. We don't understand that because we're so far from that. But a good procession can really affect the world. Like there's a Catholic parish in Chicago that I went to, and they totally understand that. Like they in Chicago, they organize these processions, like these massive processions, huge, with like everybody vested and incense and these banners and like, maybe, I don't know if they carry statues and stuff, but you get in the Orthodox tradition, they'll carry icons on banners and they'll carry holy objects and stuff, and they have these processions through space, and they kind of, let's say they transform space, by moving into it, with this kind of holy movement. And so I think that that's the highest aspect of that. So, yeah. So Connor asks, hello, Jonathan. I've been watching your videos for several months now and greatly enjoy your content. I'm reading through Genesis, and the way that Lot's daughters take advantage of him really struck me as odd. Is this just an example of how depraved the city of Sodom had gotten, or is there a deeper symbolic interpretation that I'm missing? Yeah, there is a deeper symbolic interpretation that you're missing. So this is the tough stuff, guys. This is the tough symbolism. Yeah, so Susan Martin says St. John of Cantius in Chicago. They're the ones who are doing these great processions. Okay, so the story of Lot's daughter in that moment has to do with the end of a world, and it has to do with the leveret. It's using the same symbolism as the leveret. So what the leveret is, the idea that if a man dies, then then his brother can give a son to his wife, to his widow. And so the idea of taking your brother's wife is completely immoral. Like, it's completely wrong. And so in the end, like in this weird moment of end of the world, there's a weird thing that happens. Like, there's this strange type of symbolism. You see that in the story of what's her name? Why is it that my brain isn't working tonight? When Joseph goes to Egypt, and then I can't remember the names of the characters in the scripture. What is wrong with me? There's one of the sons of Jacob. His own son dies, and then the name's going to come back to me, I hope. And then he gives, and so his wife doesn't have a child, and so he says to his other son, "You need to give a child to this woman," but he refuses to do so, and so he dies, the son. And then it's like the other son, and then the other son dies too. And so this woman is like, doesn't have a son. And so she actually ends up like sleeping with the father in order to get a son for herself from her husband. So this, like, that's the weird moment, man. That's the strange thing that happens at the end of the world. And so it's not to say that what Lot's daughters did was moral. It wasn't. But it's just in the story you see this type of flip happen, like this breakdown of meaning, like this breakdown of a coherence. And that's what leveret symbolism is about. It's about this weird break in terms of normal coherent causality. And that's what, and it brings about, the resurrection. So yeah. So it's Judah. It was Onan. Exactly. There you go. You guys have got it. And so Onan was but Onan was the son that didn't want to give a child to Judah's stepdaughter. Judah's not stepdaughter, but the daughter of his son, his first son. Yeah, and so onanism is actually a word for masturbation, or like, because it's wasting seed. And so Onan didn't want to give a son to his brother's wife, and so he wasted his seed, and so not to give her a son. So yeah. So that's it. Sorry, this is getting weird. Okay, so let's keep going here. All right, so wait, where am I here? All right. So Ari Fisher says, I asked Vervaeke on his Q&A yesterday what he thought of your assertion that reality is more like a hierarchy of beings than abstract Platonic forms. He ended up spending half the Q&A answering this question. I should listen to that. So I'll do my best to synthesize his answer. It says, because there's a pluralism of seeing the forms as either personal or impersonal across history and cultures, reality is deeply ambiguous, suggesting that the two conceptions are probably highlighting different aspects of the same reality. And because the similarity between our personhood and the forms is not technical, because of the combinatorial explosive amounts of similarities between any two identities, but rather has to do with its relevance to us. On what grounds can you legislate what people should and shouldn't find always relevant? Doing so would suggest that you have found the answer to end what has so far only been a proliferation of pluralism. Thus, we should take an evolving relationship to the sacred, not a resolving one. I'm not sure I understand the second part of that, but I agree that in a way, I agree that there is that there's a sense that there's both, and that there's a relationship between both. And you find some like resolution of that in the idea of, let's say, something like the virtues, right, which are both. The virtues are both like, they're like embodied patterns that you manifest, but they're also understood as angels. And so you have places where these kind of come together. But you have the idea of patrons. Like the idea of patrons means that because we are persons and we are the ones doing the relevance realization, right? So intelligence ends up infusing into that, and so intelligence scales up. I probably should talk about it with John. That'd be I've been looking for like a subject to talk about with him, so maybe that could be a good subject to talk about with him. All right, so Romer asks, hi, Jonathan, and congratulations on reaching 666 patrons. That's odd. It's an odd thing to say. So what symbolism stories from the Bible do you find most puzzling or impenetrable? Are there any chapters that you would be especially interested in discovering the meaning of? I think still Revelation is still, man, that book. And so it's like I did this one video on Revelation, and I'm trying to write the second one, and I'm like struggling because there's so much. It's like as soon as you start talking about it, it just splinters into a million directions, and so it's really tough. And so I feel like there are many chapters in Revelation that I don't totally understand, that I just don't get. It's just too dense. It's so dense. It's like every word, every sentence is like a little world that you have to unpack, and so it's very difficult. I mean, to be totally honest with you, I feel like the story of Jesus is a story that I don't understand still. There are things in there that are just, I mean, I have these glimpses, and sometimes it's like I have glimpses and then they vanish really fast and they kind of go away. I can never really, I mean, it's probably best that I can't. It's probably that's part of but definitely like that story. There are also a lot of stories in Judges which I have like inklings about, but some of them are just so strange that it's hard to really capture what's going on. And so like Mathieu said he was going to write a book about the book of Judges, and I was like, yes, write a book about the book of Judges. But I don't know if it's going to happen. I hope that would be awesome if he could do that, because the book of Judges is really hard to understand. Some of them you can get, and then others you're like, this is obviously has meaning. Like this obviously has meaning, but what's going on? All right. So, dear Jonathan, Tom Holland points out in Dominion that God boasts to Job about wrestling with Leviathan. Holland portrays this as a remnant of early religions where such stories were central. What is your reply? Why was it necessary for God to wrestle with Leviathan as Leviathan's creator? It's definitely not a remnant. I mean, you could say it's a remnant, but it follows all the way into the New Testament, you know. when it says that God defeats the Leviathan, the great Satan. And so there's a sense it has to do, I mean, in this sense, it has to do with the idea of God as bringing order to chaos. Like that's one of the aspects of light, of the divine logos of, and so you could say that the idea, like I've mentioned this recently in a few talks, where this like strange image at the end of Revelation, where it says that there's no more ocean, right? And so with this image of the New Jerusalem, and it says there's no more ocean. So that's like also saying there's no more Leviathan. Like those two things are very close. And so it's like Leviathan has been defeated. Chaos is gone. It's all, the whole world is full of the glory of God, let's say. And so that's what it's referring to. That's what it's culminating to, at least. And so if the source, like the physical source, or like let's say the textual reference that is used in scripture comes from, other traditions, that doesn't bother me one bit. I mean, whatever, that's fine with me. But it's still part of a puzzle that's moving towards this final image, of the serpent being cast down, of the ocean being dried up, and this chaos being finally completely defeated. So, hello, Jonathan. I don't know if you've answered this before, but why is it important for the hair of Medusas to be made of snakes? I mean, it seems to me like it's such an intuitive thing. Like it's such an intuitive thing in the sense that, right? So hair is the covering. Hair is also death. Hair is the dead things. It's like a dead covering that you have on yourself. And so it's like, doesn't it make sense to you that the snake would be like the hair, in the sense that even if you just would like to mix Christianity and Hellenic myth, like the snake brings about death, brings about the cycle of death, right? He changes his skins, he loses his skin, and he changes all the time. And so like this change, also the change, like Medusa changes people to stone, and so she's an agent of transformation in a dark sense. And so that's what snakes are. They change. I hope that makes sense, and it's like, how do you stop the Medusa? You give her an identity. Like if she sees herself, then she's done. It's like makes a lot of sense. So you freeze her. The way you stop the snakes and the dead snake hair is you freeze her. All right. I think that I don't know. That's as close as I'm going to get to that one. So Enrico says, any thoughts on symbolic meaning of us trying to become a star-faring civilization, trying to reach the heavens, or names of the space X rockets, etc.? Is it something positive, like an Abrahamic call to look at the stars and leave the Father's house, or more like a Tower of Babel story? So the first thing to understand is that the space is not the same as heavens. It's just not. Right? Space has become the ocean. So the symbolism of the ocean is the symbolism of space, the way we understand it now. Going out into space and going where no man has gone before is a seafarer's story. It's an explorer's story. It's like Alexander the Great going out into the strange lands. And so that's what space exploration is about. So it doesn't really have to do with going into heaven in the traditional sense. But is it also a form of Tower of Babel, in the sense that there is a certain arrogance, because you're really going into death. Like I really don't think that we're ever going to become a star-faring civilization, because ever is a big word, but let's say at least not on the foreseeable horizon. It's as if you could. It's like asking a whole civilization. It's like asking people to live under the ocean for a very long time. it's like technology can hold out chaos to a certain extent, but if you try to like live right in the chaos like all the time, at some point the cracks, you can't avoid the little cracks. They're going to start to, the water's going to seep in. You can't live in space. Space is death. Space is absolute death. It's the most hostile place that exists that you can think of. It'd be like living in like a molten lava. I mean, you could do it, but you can't live like that forever. So I don't think that we could really become a starfaring civilization. All right, so hi, Jonathan. What is the meaning behind not blessing the firstborn in Scripture? When Jacob crosses his hands, I came to remember you say that flips occur at edge of categories. Is this a transition point in the story? Yeah, I've talked about this before. That's a difficult, it's a difficult text to interpret because you're not sure which way it's going. And so you can understand that Jacob steals the blessing from his father. And so there's like this flip where Esau is supposed to get the blessing. Jacob takes it from him. And so when he crosses, when Joseph, who is Jacob's favorite son, comes to have his sons blessed, the idea is that Jacob crosses his hands. And so it's not clear whether he crosses his hands because he's trying to reproduce the same pattern and he's being tricky Jacob again, or there's another tradition, which is that Joseph, out of respect, presented the children the other way around, out of respect for his father, knowing that his father was the second born and got the blessing, and that then Jacob crosses his hands to restate, the right way. And I'm not sure which one it is. So yeah, it does have to do with this flip between the left and the right for sure. That's definitely what it has to do with. And it has to do ultimately with the problem of how Christ ends up blessing Cain. The firstborn gets blessed again. Rome gets blessed because Israel is the secondborn. It's always the secondborn. Israel is the secondborn from the beginning. From the time of Abel, it's the whole mythological structure around Israel is about the secondborn. And so there's a sense in which there's a flip that happens in Christianity. Yeah. So JL says, Joe says, I remember an episode of the television show 30 Rock where Weird Al Yankovic parodies a parody song and it results in an earnest patriotic country and Western anthem. Weird Al becomes normal Al. Is humor only ever subversive, solely recreative? Also, since being baptized, I've managed to retain, to some extent, a few cool cat, obscure, secular type friends, and I've noticed an increase in the mockery of things that were originally mockery themselves. Yeah. Something irks me about the advent of Shrek memes and their ilk, but I can't put my finger on it. Every blessing. I'm not sure about what you mean in terms of that, but for sure there is exactly that. Like there is the idea of irony kind of turning back on itself, and it's inevitable that that'll happen. That's kind of this double flip that I talk about, or I talk about watch the fools in terms of watching the fool kind of restate the normal in the end. That's definitely what it's all about. And so, yeah, maybe that is what Shrek is about. Like, I've never really thought about it. Maybe the Shrek, because Shrek is the ogre, right? Shrek is the weirdo, is the excluded one. And so the idea of like mocking Shrek for being, the whole tip the fedora thing and that whole kind of aesthetic of those Shrek memes, those were maybe having to do with that. Like a weird double mocking. I haven't thought about it so much though. So Drew McMahon asks, hi Jonathan, do you have any thoughts on the veganism movement that seems to be taking over? Every restaurant and fast food place has some Beyond Meat or Impossible Burger option. Yeah. Yeah, the aesthetics of the vegan is important to understand because there's a transhuman aspect to it, like a weird technological aspect to veganism. It's strange. You wouldn't think it. Like you'd think that veganism would kind of have a kind of earthy vegetable look, like a, like a back to the earth type aesthetic, but it has a weird kind of you know, technological food aspect of it. And so even the term like impossible burger is an interesting in terms of understanding the strange extreme that it represents. But yeah, it's definitely an odd thing. My feeling about it has something to do with this weird, like it's not, because I mentioned earlier about how the monks are vegetarian and that they also live, but I think that it's weird deincarnation, this veganism, like this, especially the aggressive kind of veganism. But I'm not sure. I need to think about it more. So Marshall McLuhan, G. Garcia asks, sorry, I forget to tell you to mention the names. Nathan Hart says, reading Dominion, I can't help but start to feel that the temporal evolution of Christianity is deterministic, and that even if traditional Christianity were to be restored to its former status, the process would merely repeat itself and we'd be back where we are today. Do you think this is true, or were the reformations that took place unique, not inevitable? And so I think they're inevitable, not in a deterministic way, but in the story will play itself out way, in the sense that, Christ said, he said, there has to be scandal, but it doesn't mean that they're good. Like, it doesn't mean that their scandals are good. He also says, but beware, don't be the one by which the scandal comes. And so it's like the story of Christian. It's like saying that Christ was going to die. And so it's like, it was part of the story, but those that killed him still killed him. It's not like they're absolved of their thing, although Christ does say, forgive them, but still, like, they still bear the responsibility for their actions. And so Christianity has to go through this. And I don't think that traditional Christianity will be restored to its former status. I don't think that's going to happen. And I don't think that's what we're doing. It's like, I don't feel like that's what I'm doing. Like, I'm mostly trying to plant seeds, I would say. But although I say that, okay, look, so I say that, but here's Russia, right? So here's Russia, where, it's, although they're not the majority, they're still like the Orthodox Christians are still, it's like driving force in culture. So who knows, really? Like, seriously, I shouldn't speak too fast. All right, so G. Garcia says, Marshall McLuhan talks about a conceptual bias of the Western world. Can you elaborate on this? This seems to this. I'm not sure. I don't know. Like, I'd have to read what Marshall McLuhan says. This seems related to you and Jordan's conversation. Personally speaking, I think I understand conceptually this hierarchy of being you talk about, but what does it mean to get past mere concepts? And so maybe that's what you mean, in the sense that, like, I keep talking about how ultimately these patterns are embodied. Like, they're not, although we talk about them, we think about them, there's a way in which they have to be embodied, they have to be lived, they have to be engaged in. And so it's not just about sitting around and thinking about them, right? Ultimately, that's why I say, like, ultimately you have to go to church, you have to get involved, you can't just think about it. All right, so Jan Peter Jager says, could you explain the symbolism of the Marble King legend of the Reposed King in Orthodoxy? Do you mean like the last emperor legend? I'm not sure I know which legend you're talking about. And you might be talking about the idea that the last emperor will kind of awaken at the end, or there are different ideas about how, for example, like the people who celebrated the liturgy, like, kind of walked into the walls and kind of became part of the walls. There's this whole idea that something when Constantinople fell, that there was this freezing of something and that it will awaken in the end. Maybe that's what you mean. I'm not sure. But this idea of the hidden king, or the king that is waiting to come back, it's obviously a Christian trope. Like, it's the trope of the return of Christ, but it's also the trope in Arthurian legend and these other types of legends. And it really is this kind of return to the king motif that you see in Lord of the Rings. And that's what I think it means, if that's what you're talking about. All right, so guys, I think I'm going to skip a few of your questions. Sometimes your questions are really long. It's just difficult because I want to get to the questions. So Dorothea says, could you comment on the Queen of Heaven in the book of Jeremiah and her relation to the Mother of God? Especially since some of the things the prophet is condemning sounds like medieval Marian miracles. Thanks. And so the way to understand that is to say something, because one of the things I keep telling you guys about is that Christianity is ultimately a non-dual thing. It's not. Christ offers the manner in which things get saved. And so, like, if you listen to the Lord of Spirits podcast, they really go into this very well. So there's a sense in which, let's say, these hierarchies of gods that existed, that this is actually what God wanted in the outset, that God set upon the world these guardians, these principalities that were there to in like a hierarchy of being, supposed to manage at their level the will of God in the world. And so then those principalities rebelled against God and tried to take worship and power for themselves. So it's yes, it sounds abstract and it sounds like just something that's hard to understand, but you can understand it at a lower level if you want to, right? You can understand that that there's a country with a certain organization, and that the country, the army, they have generals, and those generals are there to manifest the will of the emperor, let's say, and to have wars in different to be able to manifest the will of the emperor in the different aspects of the kingdom. And then some of those generals or some of those aristocrats decide that they're just going to stop at themselves. They're just going to take it for themselves. And therefore they start to gather money. They take the worship, they take the money, they take the things of the people, but they don't offer up to that which is above them. And they try to be little gods in themselves. And that's what this is talking about in terms of these lower principles that are getting power for themselves, but that aren't participating in the giant pattern the proper way. They're revolutionary. And so the idea would be that the Queen of Heaven is still a real function in the world, and that Mary plays that role in a proper way, in a way in which she says yes to God, in a way in which she offers worship to God. So the icons of the Mother of God show her worshiping Christ. The icons of the Mother of God show her praying to God. Right? So when you look at an icon of the Mother of God and she's praying up. And so the image of the Queen of Heaven is one which is giving the honor, the whatever it is that comes to her, offering it up higher. So that's the difference between the divine council, which is being reinstated through the saints and through our reigning with Christ, through our capacity to rule with him, and the ancient hierarchy of gods. But what's going to happen is it's not surprising that you're going to see that the patterns are actually going to resemble. But obviously Mary, if you look at her story, if you look at images of her, if you look at everything about her, there's nowhere where she keeps that honor for herself. Nowhere. She's always offering it up. So you could pretend that that's not what's going on, and you could say, "Oh no, yes, it looks like she's offering it up. Right? It looks like she is, but no, it's all idolatry. But it's not idolatry, because there is this whole movement up towards the God of creation, and so the honor that we give to the people that manifest God to us, they are carried up into into the highest. They don't stop at them. It's the best way to understand it. So you will see the tropes of the titles of ancient pagan gods. Those titles are not necessarily wrong, right? So it's like you don't like the idea of, let's say, the god of war, but you don't have a problem with Saint Michael, the commander of God's army. Those are similar. Just that one is subject and and offers his service and his worship up to the infinite, and the other has a lower sense in which he can do his own thing and can kind of tyrannize the world and make people slaves to his own passionate structure. So I don't know. I hope that helps. I feel like I'm going further in explaining this stuff to you guys than I ever have. All right, so Kent Anhari says, "Hi, Jonathan, blessed fast. Here's something that might interest you, provided you're not already aware. The long standard translation of the first Hermos of the Paschal Canon in the Antiochian Archdiocese calls Pharaoh the persecuting giant of old." This is a mistranslation from Arabic, where the word that should have been more properly rendered tyrant could also mean giant. Yeah, this isn't the case in the Greek or Slavonic text, but has always felt a bit to me like Moses' horns. Yeah, which you've elsewhere talked about as a kind of symbolic productive mistranslation. Any thoughts on the relationship between pharaohs, tyrants, and giants? Any more examples of symbolically productive mistranslations you can think of? That's a great example of what I'm talking about. Because for sure, the Pharaoh, especially the Pharaoh, there's something about Egypt which is connected to this whole idea of giants in the sense of the absolute stranger, right? And so you can understand that in the relationships of peoples in that time, so let's say Egypt really represented this ancient this ancient power that wasn't submitted to the God of Israel. And so it really is this kind of ultimate stranger, which is related to the idea of the giant. So that's a great example of what I talk about. All right, so what time is it? 10:37. We're doing okay. All right, so Charlie Longoria says, "What do you think it means that more and more people are adopting pets rather than having kids?" Yeah, I saw a bumper sticker saying "dog mom" and another saying "I love my grand dog." Oh man, and it creeps me out, especially because I think having kids was the last thing attaching people to some sort of transcendent good. Parents want the best future for their kids, but I can see a world coming where people just want the best for themselves. Yeah, it's definitely a sign. Like this sign of the people having pets is definitely. I mean, it's fine to have a pet. I have a cat. It's okay, but it's mostly the problem of this kind of. There's like a prophecy. It's not a prophecy, but there's a description in Plato's Republic where they talk about democracy, and it's hilarious because they're basically describing the world we live in. But one of the descriptions in democracy is that people end up treating their animals as their equals. And it's like, yeah, you totally understand the problem of gaining legitimacy from that which is below. Like what that does, like it devolves, right? It starts to devolve, and then we start to think that the animals should have rights, and then the robots should have rights, and then it's like you're gonna keep going. The trees will have rights, and then the grass will have rights, and it's like this weird thing where it just kind of starts to devolve because there's no sense of normal hierarchy. Then you don't know how authority ends up working. So yeah, it's definitely a sign of the times, that's for sure. All right, so Josh Anderson says, "Hi, Jonathan. What do you think is the power behind a movie or modern story with a meta reality? For instance, Wizard of Oz, where Dorothy wakes up to reality with her relatives playing major parts in the meta reality. The Matrix, where Neo wakes up from the meta reality. Or finally, Truman Show, where everyone else is in on a reality you're not allowed to be part of because you're the subject of a meta reality. I feel as if our culture has a fascination with these types of plot devices. And I'm wondering, on a symbolic level, what do you think drives the popularity and admiration these movies often stir? Thanks. So I don't think all of these are the same. So I'm not sure the Truman Show is the same thing as the Matrix, let's say, in terms of that notion. But yeah. So I mean, I think that you could say that what these types of stories do is that they are talking about the intuition we have that there's something missing. Like there's something missing in the world. And so it's like, what is that? There's that the sense that this world is not enough. And so that's, I mean, you could say that that's really where all the religious impulse comes from and kind of condenses into. And so but it's not just about this representing these layers of reality, let's say like in the Matrix, but it's every quest story, every story where every MacGuffin story, right? Every story where people are fighting over something that they need, something that they're missing. And if they could just have that thing, then everything would be okay. And so it's like, that's just this weird human condition we have, which is ultimately this desire for the infinite. Like it's ultimately the strange position we're in as intelligent beings, to have this upward movement, to have this movement towards more. And so I think that's what it's about. But the funniest part of this, the funniest are the simulation people, like the people who say that the world is a simulation. And it's like, I just find that so hilarious, because what is the simulation of? And so it's like, I completely agree that the world in a way is a layers of simulation, but it's not in a bad sense, but you could say it's a layered world of realities that are stacked on each other. And so that's a traditional way of understanding it. And so let's say the lower rungs of the world are heavier and have more layers on them. And as you kind of remove the layers, you have access to more reality and more light, you could say. And it also helps you understand or helps you see the reason for the lower ones. Not in a, it's like, so it's not like a Gnostic sense where you're just where the body is bad or anything, but it's mostly that it's like as you move up, you kind of see the reason for the lower things. But the way that people phrase it, it's so superficial. It's like it's so superficial. So I kind of joke and say, like, the world is a simulation. It's called language. It's just language is the simulation, in the sense that it's the condensation or even concepts or even any form, any particular, making particular ends up being what you would call the simulation, right? Because it's pointing to something which transcends it, but it's manifesting it in a approximate way, you could say. And so that's that feeling we have that there's something more. Anyways. All right. So Ileana asks, hi, Jonathan. Most of the fictional movies and TV I like come from all over East Asia, things like anime, but also movies and dramas. Can you offer any guidance on symbolic interpretation and understanding of stories that emerge from non-Western cultures in general or Asian cultures particularly? And if you happen to have seen Heaven's Official's Blessing on Netflix, any thoughts on that specific show? No. It's like, I mean, I think I've told you guys that I actually don't watch a lot of stuff. And so once in a while I'll watch, I watched WandaVision, then I made a critique about it. And so, so the sense that I have, let's say, and so the one series that I have been kind of watching very slowly is Attack on Titan, just because the pattern of it, the visuals of it were so when I saw what it was, I like, this story is obviously talking about something very, very much about what I'm talking about in terms of this this wall, this city with walls, and these giants that are coming in from the outside that are trying to attack the city. But then it turns out that it's actually related to some kind of sin that you don't know about. Like, I'm not finished yet, but like you seem like there's some kind of sin that's hidden, which is causing the giants on the outside. And so it's actually seemed pretty good. And so, like, my intuition is that maybe the East Asian stories haven't completely tumbled into like ideological blah, like just this ideological nonsense that we're falling into. So I don't know, but like my daughter's really into anime, and so she really gets a lot from that stuff. So I hope that's what it is. But there's a lot of dark stuff in East Asian stuff too. Like there's some dark stuff there too. Like, I'm not saying they're completely they've avoided the depravity of our culture, that's for sure. All right, so Julius Barsdaitis. Sorry, Julius. Hey, Jonathan, last month, a part of my question was about what an angel of London would be if the city were to burn. From your answer, it was clear that principalities and spirit in general can exist without embodiment. No, that's not what I said. So the follow-up, are there some ways for us bodily beings of conceiving this unembodied existence, and more importantly, the manner that unembodied interactions occurs? So an example could be maybe the war in heaven. In what way would an angel fight a demon? If there were no matter for that interaction to express itself in? Is this interaction ungraspable for human beings? All the best. So first of all, I didn't say that they were completely without body. And so you could, a good way to understand it, what I was trying to explain is that if the angel of London is still the angel of London, if the city burns, because there's a manner in which London exists outside of time, you could say, exist in the totality of all things that exist. And so angels don't have they don't exist in time the same way we do. And so that's really what I was trying to get to. It's not that they just exist disembodied while the city of London has burned down, but that they are always the angel of London, to the extent that London has a stretch in space and in time that actually has a hierarchy of manifestation in the world that has a limit, but then all things have that. And so anything that angels, the only thing that is infinite is God. And so anything that angels are heads of have an extension in space or time, and that's what they're heads of. But they all exist. All of this exists in the eternal reality, that is all contained in this eternal reality that is God. And so anyways, it's hard to talk about this stuff in a way that is easily understandable. So hopefully that's the best I can do, I guess. All right, so I think that's it. But for some reason, it tells me there's 2 more comments in Patreon, but I can't see them. So sorry guys, if I missed one of your questions. All right, so I've got a few more questions in Patreon that appeared. Sorry. So Keenan Wang asks, what do you see as the meaning of the different points of perspective in Orthodox art? What do you make of the overlap between this aspect of Orthodox art and Cubism? Or is there a connection? So there are different interpretations of that. I tend to see it as, the way that I tend to see it is that it's closer to how you actually experience reality. And people are going to find that hard to believe. But the thing is that the idea of representing something in a static position, like the idea of representing reality, like if you stop and you take a picture and you think that that's the closest representation of reality, that's not true. That's not how we experience reality. And so it's like when I experience a building, let's say, or I tend in my experience to want to have the best vision of something in order to remember it. And so there's an angle, like a best angle by which I can experience a building and remember it, knowing that I'm moving, right? So it's like I'm walking in front of a building and I'm seeing it from different sides as I'm moving. And so then I have a memory of that building, and that memory will just be in the best position to represent not just the building, but even the different aspects of the building. And so I think that that's what's going on in Orthodox art. It's like a compression of an experience that actually happens in time and in space into one thing. But it's not like the cubist, because the cubist did it in an abstract way, did it in a kind of pushing it to a level which had nothing to do with human experience. But whereas I think the way it happens in icons has more to do with a more embodied representation of how you kind of experience these buildings as you walk around them, and these different objects and these different things, and not as this kind of stop in time and try to fix the world in one thing. But there are different theories about that. There's also this whole theory about inverse perspective, which I'm not so sure about. But that's like I said, that's the way that I best understand it, is as this, the problem of representing reality in so for example, like a good idea, like for example, you'll see in icons and you'll see in ancient art this idea that things are represented bigger depending on their meaning, rather than their actual distance in space. But that's also closer to the way we actually experience reality, in the sense that if I'm looking in the landscape and I'm focusing on something, like I'm focusing on one tree in the landscape, if I represent that in a painting, how can I tell you what I'm focusing on? Because if I just represented flatly as this like picture that I just take a picture and there's this tree, but if I was focusing on this one tree, I need a way to show you that that's the important thing in the image. And so making it bigger is a totally intuitively normal way of doing that. It's like I'm saying this is the important thing in the image, right? Because I'm making it bigger. I'm bringing it closer to you, just like you actually experience that. So when you focus on something, you experience it as being closer to you. Even if it's further from you in space, you will experience it as being closer to you, to your experience, than other things that are closer in your perceptual field, but that you're not paying attention to. So anyway, so those are the kind of things that I think are part of why they're represented that way. But it's not like a set thing. So Susan Martin asked, what are your favorite movies that have positive or uplifting symbolism that are not part of the postmodern propaganda? Have you seen films like The Tree of Life or The Kingdom of Heaven, or films by Tarkovsky? And so, I mean, I love, like we talked about East Asian stuff. I love the Ghibli movies. I keep pointing people to that, especially if you have kids. All those movies are wonderful in terms of a powerful storytelling. You know, I think, for example, like The Lion King by Disney was just right on. There's not a lot wrong with The Lion King, in terms of kids movies, especially. Wasn't a big fan of the Tree of Life, to be honest. I just struggled to get through that. It seemed like disjointed to me. So Tarkovsky movies, I think, definitely are dealing with some very powerful things. I just watched Nostalgia recently, and it was tough. It was hard to get through because it would really required a lot of attention, but it had some very powerful imagery in it as well. So, and I think, like, how can I say this? I think, like, despite the propaganda, let's give you an example. Like, so Marvel movies are being completely invaded by propaganda, but like the story of Tony Stark sacrificing himself using the gauntlet at the end of the series. That was a great move. Like that was a great image of a Christian virtue embodied in a story. And so I can still see a lot of the other crap that's going on, but I can also recognize that there is nonetheless these little glimmers appear through that. So Matthew Mole Brandon says, can we use symbolism for democracy freedom as in the past? In a similar way as religious symbolism that connects story and meaning. In the US, the dollar bills are full of meaning, but now just ornaments. I'm not sure I totally understand your question. So let me say this: like one of the things that the U.S. has done that has helped it is trying to frame their democracy under God. So the idea of putting on the dollar bill and God we trust, a lot of people criticize that because they think, oh, it's money and it's stupid to put that there. But I think these are kind of last ditch efforts to unite the people under a transcendent reality, because I think some people realized early on, or maybe in the past century or so, that democracy isn't enough. Like democracy can't hold a country together, and so you need to call upon something higher. So you need something to unite you. All right, and so I think that's done for Patreon. I'm sorry, I might miss some of it because I know people keep posting them, and so I can't always get the ones you just posted. All right, so let me go into super chats. It's already 11 though, man. It's taken up a lot of time. But let's see what's in there. Where I always forget where those are. Yeah. Okay, there they are. Because there's two places where they hide them, and so it's like I got them. All right, so let's see. April, man, there's a lot of questions, guys. I'm not sure I'm going to get through these. Let's try. All right, so Louis Durand for $5 says, why was Adam made from dust? Why was Eve made from his rib? Deistic thinking would suggest God would have made them both out of nothing. Aha, interesting. Well, no, they wouldn't. And so the idea that God made Adam out of dust is you want to understand, emergence, and you want to understand consciousness. That's what's going on. It's so God gathers in all the dust, gathers in multiplicity. And that's what you are, and that's what you do. Multiplicity gets gathered into a place, and then the Spirit of God is blown into man. So the meaning, the spirit, the invisible pattern gets injected into the gathered dust, and that's what creates man, right? And so at a lower level, that's how everything works. Like that's how reality works, because we don't create out of nothing. Only God creates out of nothing. At a lower level, we gather dust and we condense it into unities. And so we can notice the multiplicity and unity in things, and we participate in that coming together. So that's why Adam is made out of dust, because he is an image of all of creation. In a way, he is a condensation of the bringing together multiplicity into unity. And then God asked him to do the same, let's say, by naming the animals afterward. And then why was he made from his rib? So this has to do, there are different ways of understanding that. One is, my favorite way of understanding is mostly the idea that Adam was cut in half. And that's probably, it's like it was made from his side. It's probably the way that I best like understanding that. So Adam, So it says in Scripture that God created them male and female. Like God created them. God made the dust, blew into the nostrils, and God. But then in the first version, it said that he created the male and female. And so there's like this ambiguity of how, in a way, Adam contained both to get at the beginning, and then was separated into two. And that's kind of why it seems like the church fathers, like St. Gregory of Nyssa, for example, says weird things like how Eve was created as a provision for the fall. God, having known that man would fall, is why Eve was created. So yeah. But like there are different. St. John Chrysostom, for example, talks about how Eve was created out of the rib of man to not be subject to him at the outset, but that they would be equals in, like, maybe that Adam would have a role of primacy of origin, but that Eve would be his equal in the way that they would interact. So, all right. So Alan Tam, $5. Thank you. Phil Cohen, $10. I recently became a catechumen, mostly due to your work. Many years to you and your family. Thank you, Phil. Thank you. So Devin Shane for $4.99 says, have you watched The Chosen? And if so, what are your thoughts? Advice for a Protestant inquiring into Orthodoxy. So I wasn't a big fan of that, I have to say. I watched it with my family, and my wife really loved it, and my son loved it. My daughter didn't like it. I didn't like it very much. I'm sorry. It's just hard. It's just hard to make a story with Jesus as a character. It's just very difficult. I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm not saying that, but it's just really hard because. And so I felt like The Chosen was trying to make Christ into just this like happy-go-lucky hipster pastor, and it's not working for me. Sorry. All right, so Ulysses K. Hughes for €5 says, after your last video and your talks on the Divine Comedy, can you tell us some thoughts on Milton's Paradise Lost? I would have to. I don't think I could wing that. I would definitely have to. I mean, I think maybe one day I will make a video on that. I think it's important in the sense of, I think it plays a role. I talk about it a little bit in the Montero video, where I definitely think the image of Satan, the way that it's developed in Paradise Lost, plays a role in modernity, and kind of this understanding of this heroic Promethean devil. And so there's definitely that. But I would have to prepare myself because it's a big subject. So sorry. So the ABC 123456399 for $20 US says, the symbolism of the ultimate angel tetromorph, specifically the circle with the three wings on them on both sides below the main angel. What? Symbolism of the ultimate angel tetromorph, specifically the circle with the three wings on them both sides. I don't understand the question. Sorry, ABC. Are you talking about the drawing that I did, like the ultimate angel tetromorph, the design? And I'm not sure I understand the question. Sorry, man. All right, Stephen Anderson for $8. Is there a connection to masculinity and hunting? Feminine being farming. How one seeks out opportunity, the other creates environment. I don't think so. I don't think that there's a relationship between that. I think that both in, let's say, hunting and in terms of farming, I think that there's both masculine and feminine in both of those. So Noel, and you could think about it, like you could think about the masculine and feminine aspect of hunting. It'd be interesting. For example, you could think of baiting as a kind of a more feminine action in the sense of seducing or drawing in or creating a place to kind of attract things, to create an actual place. And then, shooting an arrow or spear or something would be a more masculine action. So maybe that can make sense. All right. So Noel Tham for $4.99. Would you ever consider doing a vid on the Book of Enoch? Yeah, definitely. Definitely. I think especially now with like all the Lord of Spirits stuff going on, I'm thinking that that's going to happen at some point. It's so funny because I've been kind of avoiding talking about this stuff too explicitly because I felt like people weren't ready for it and they would just not understand what it's talking about. And it's like God has funny ways sometimes, and just like all of a sudden, like the Lord of Spirits appears, and it's like everybody's just rushing in, and I'm thinking that's awesome, like it's wonderful. I'm really happy for that. So yeah, definitely, I should probably do that. So Courtney Wiley for $4.99. Love your work. I never see many women in your chats. Is it against Eastern Orthodox teaching for women to participate in this kind of discourse? I don't think so. I don't think that's what's going on. I think that, I think that I would need to, I don't know why. It's hard to totally explain, I guess. I would say this, there is, okay, so I think that it's normal. This is going to sound weird to a lot of people. Like, I'm not a priest, like I'm not an official person. I think it's inevitable that men should want to talk to men more than talk to women, and women should in general want to talk to women more, just out of like a weird healthy thing about relationships. And so I am always very, like, for example, I'll give you an example. Like, I'm always very cautious. Like, I almost never will have like dinner or a coffee with a woman alone, unless it's like a very old lady, like something like it's very clear. But I'm super careful about that stuff. And so it might be boiling out in my behavior online. It's possible. And I'm sorry if that's what's happening. But I have had some conversations with some people, and there's a video with Dr. Paula Boddington, which is coming out soon, on AI again, and on the ethics of she's an expert on the ethics of AI, but also on the ethics of kind of biological medical bio stuff. And so there's a video coming out in the next few weeks on that. So that'll be fun. So that might be what it is. I'm not sure. I don't totally, it's like I actually just kind of move organically and just invite people, and people that come on my horizon. I don't have a system really. You guys are having me like trying to understand my own behavior here. All right. So Process Raoul for $5 says, "Hey, Jonathan, big fan of your videos. I wanted to get your opinion of Orthodox theologian David Bentley Hart." I don't think that's, I'm not going to answer that question. I'm sorry, Process. I don't want to answer. If you have a question about specific things that he said, I will answer that question, but I'm not going to answer an opinion on him. That's not a good idea, I think. All right. So Don Hugo Teat for $7.99. I think it's Australian. Mason Bradford for $10, Australian. I think in terms of symbolism, is there a relationship between a train and a serpent? Interesting. I don't think so. I've never thought about it. I've never thought about that. I'd have to think about it, because it slithers, I guess, because it's flexible, maybe. I have to think about that. All right, so James Schwartz for $5. How might someone send you a piece of digital art, and would it be possible to hear your initial reaction live like this? It's always possible to send me stuff on email. You can find my email on my carving website. I don't kind of advertise it just outright, but you can find it if you're looking for it. Whether or not I'm going to answer just really depends on what I'm going through. Sometimes I get 20 messages a day of people kind of trying to get my attention for something. And so because of that, I've actually tended not to answer people. not because I don't want to, just because if I do, I end up spending my whole day in front of the computer, which I already end up doing despite that. And I need to carve. And so I would say, like, in the past month, I haven't carved a lot because there's, especially since the Jordan Peterson interview, there's been so many things that require my like attention and answer to, and so it's difficult. But if you send me something that's awesome, like that's totally awesome, I'll answer. It doesn't mean that if it's good, it doesn't mean that if I don't answer, it's bad. But if it's like astoundingly awesome, then I'll probably answer. So you can give it a try. Rich Gray, can you help me with Christophanies in the Old Testament? I don't know how to answer that. It's a very vague question. I mean, in the sense that that there are images in the Old Testament which seem to point to the incarnation. And so I would say that that's it. So like different images that, like let's say I'm trying to go blank right now. My mind is drawing a blank. It's like the Old Testament is full of them. So for example, like the image of the image of the Ancient of Days with the Son of Man. And so it's like that's an image of Christ that is kind of starting to appear. And so there are different versions of that. All right, so David Furtado says for 5BRRL, I don't know what that is. When reading the Bible, should we use the meaning of the words had back then or use today's meanings of the words? I mean, I think you need to use as much as possible. Try to get the meaning of the word in the old meanings of the words, but ultimately you hope that the fathers and the saints and the translators and all these people have been able to transmit these in a way that is relevant today. And so it's not just a weird desire to be accurate, because that usually doesn't give much. So Chandler Turner, $5 USD. Most of those my age, mid-20s, who don't outright reject religion, there's a strong draw towards perennialism. What is the argument against it? I would say the easiest argument against perennialism is that it ends up acting as a weird pseudo religion. Like it ends up acting as something which stands above religion, and then people can think that they're superior to religion in their perennial position. And so it ends up acting like a weird, prideful kind of idea that I can judge the other religions. And that's what you end up seeing with perennialists, is that they're often like saying, well, this is good here, this is bad here, this is, they kind of have this strange capacity to stand above everything and to judge it. And I think that that's deadly for the soul. It's not a real path. It's just like a weird abstraction. So that's what I would say, the main argument, at least that I have against it. So David Koziar for 1144 CID, do you have any thoughts on Gnosticism and why God would be calling out, asking where Adam is in the garden? Could this be a demiurge, the false God speaking, since it's not omniscient? Thanks. So this is actually a really important question, in the sense that everything that God does in Scripture, everything that God says, every way that you see God in Scripture is a condescension. And so the idea that God acts out in the world in a way that humans can understand, it doesn't mean that it's a demiurge or a false God. It just means that God, since God is the source of all reality, then God manifests himself at the level of reality that is appropriate to whatever God is wherever God is appearing in the world. And so we can't see these gestures, or the fact that God appears as an angel, or that God appears in the burning bush, or that God appears in these different things, or as the glory of God that descends in the temple. We can't see that as a limiting of God, but rather just let's say just God revealing himself at the level where he's revealing himself, and then pointing ultimately to something which transcends that manifestation. So anyways, that's the way I understand it. It's the best way I understand it. So the villain report for $49.99. Hello, Jonathan. I saw you speak on the issue of the resurrection being literal, but you laughed at the question and seemed to be unconcerned with it. Do you believe it's literal? Sorry, I'm laughing again, villain report. How is that knowledge found? Thank you for your unique perspective. I don't know what that word means. The word literal. Like, do you mean that okay, so if you mean that you'll be resurrected with the same body, can I say this? At the same, with all the same limitations and characteristics that you have now, then no, that's not what the resurrection is. Obviously not. The resurrection is obviously more than just this body that it's more. And so but the resurrection is real. It's not just a metaphor. And so when you read the way that St. Paul talks about spiritual bodies, I don't totally know what that completely means. I can have inklings of it. I can have intuitions of it. I can trust St. Paul enough. I can trust Christ enough to understand what that's kind of pointing to, but I don't completely see it. I can understand the story enough to trust that nothing is lost. Say it that way. That if the world is non-dual, if reality exists, then there's a manner in which it exists in a totality of existence. And that totality has its own reality, and that includes bodies, and it includes body. But I can't completely see it. I have intuitions of it. And so I think that anybody who thinks that the resurrection just means that whatever I look at in the mirror, like the saggy thing this hairy, saggy thing that I look at when I'm looking at myself naked in the mirror, it's like, if that's not what the resurrection is, I'm sorry to tell you, it's like that's not at all what. There's nothing. Let's say the transfigured Christ that appears in the gospel seems to be an image of the resurrected body. The ascending Christ who ascends into heaven seems to be an image of the resurrected body. And there are moments in the tradition, for example, Saint Seraphim of Sarov shows to his inquirer what the resurrected body is, or what it and what he manifests is like pure flame, and that's what the person sees. And so it's like the resurrected body is it's not an obvious thing. It's something you understand in the story, but you can't understand in its reality until you experience it. And so I haven't experienced the resurrection. All right, I recall you saying, so John Lefebvre says, I recall you saying you listened to Kanye as Jesus Walks. Have you listened to Kendrick Lamar's Good Kid, Mad City? It is steeped in Christian symbolism and would love to hear your take. So it's funny because who was it I saw talk about that recently? Someone talked about that on Twitter. And I was sitting and it was weird because I was an idiot. I wasn't thinking. I was sitting at the table and I was with my daughter, and someone said, "Oh, this album has like Christian symbolism, and I'd love to hear your take." So I'm like, okay. So I was drawing with her, and so I put it on, which was like the stupidest thing that I could have done. So I put it on, and like after 1 minute, I'm like, okay, let's turn this off, as I'm sitting here with my 13-year-old daughter. And so no, I didn't finish listening to it. So I mean, I guess I'll listen to it at some point. I don't know. I just thought it was it started off, let's say, rather crass and crude, which I'm not, like, I understand. I'm not a not a prude or anything, but I'll listen to it on my own time at some other point. So Carlos Vargas for 499. Hey Jonathan, more news on God's dog. It's coming. It's coming. It's coming, but I don't have it told. I don't have a definite date. All right. Patrick Morrison for $10 USD. Best wishes, Jonathan. Thank you. That Laura Person 999. Did you happen to see the Kanye and the Sunday Service Choir perform at DMX's memorial service? Interestingly, Kanye has been wearing a black veil at recent public events. I have not followed that. No, like I haven't followed. So I haven't followed Kanye's recent things. I know that he's getting a divorce and everything. You have to be careful a little bit because like sometimes I feel like maybe how can I say this? Like I said, watch the fools and just be careful. Like I didn't say follow the fools or so yeah, I think there's still some things that are going to come out of Kanye, but yeah. All right, so Guillaume Parent for $6.99 Canadien asked me a question in French. Le Québec me semble être dans un état de vide spirituel grave, voire existentiel. Y a-t-il de l'espoir? J'ai souvent de la difficulté à en trouver. And so, sorry, Guillaume, I'm going to have to translate that in English because everybody, I would say 98% of the people watching this. So he says, Quebec seems to be in a grave spiritual state, even existential state. Is there hope? I often have difficulty finding some. And how about that, Guillaume? Let me say this to you, is that I have a similar thought. And I think if you've followed me, you know that I have this kind of despair regarding Quebec and the French-speaking Canada. But Quebec has a way of moving in a block. Like it has a weird tendency to kind of shift everybody kind of shifts at the same time. And so there might be a shift on the horizon. Who knows, all we can do is plant seeds. And I've started like, this is something that, as COVID kind of winds down, I'm going to be emphasizing some more local stuff, French stuff. I started the French podcast with JP Marceau. If you go on my French channel, Jonathan Pajot Français, you will find we've already done, I think, like 5 episodes of our podcast in French. And I'm going to start to be more present in French-speaking world. So hopefully it'll help me be more connected to French Canadians, at least. And hopefully we can plant some seeds for something. So Christian Stander asks, hi, Jonathan, please, can you explain how God is at the same time the essence similar to the chair of the cup and also a personified entity we talk to? So God is not, it's 3 persons. That's important to understand. And so God is infinite. God is not, is the infinite. It's not the same as a chair. So it's not completely, it's not something that I can answer. I'm not good at this also at that kind of question. And then running out of steam as well. All right, so the new guy, it's like 11:30. You guys are keeping me up. It's crazy. All right, so the new guy for $4.99. Are there examples of warrior saints in the Christian tradition? And if so, does one stand out to you? Any who were literal historic figures? For sure. Yeah, I mean, for sure. Like, there's definitely Saint George, who is kind of like the ultimate warrior saint. But there are other warrior saints, Saint Demetrios, Saint Mercurius. There are plenty of them, and some of them were historical figures for sure. So the Villain Report goes back and says, did Christ actually resurrect in reality in the same way that I had breakfast this morning? In reality, did it really happen? I want to believe, but I don't want to lie to get there. And so read the scripture, okay? What's written in scripture is what happened. So if that helps you, it's like, yes, Christ did resurrect in reality. And it's not exactly in the same way that you ate breakfast or the banality of your eating breakfast in this morning. It's not the same way because it doesn't have the same effect on reality that eating your breakfast in this morning had. It just doesn't. I can't, sorry to read the story and look at what happens. Look at how the disciples don't recognize him. And then all of a sudden they recognize him. Look at how Christ appears in the room, with all the doors closed. Look at how he ascends into heaven. He's standing there with the disciples, then he vanishes up, and then these two angels are there. It's like, that's not how you ate your breakfast this morning. I don't know what happens when you eat your breakfast, but that stuff doesn't happen when I eat my breakfast. And so yes, it definitely happened, but it's not at the same level as your breakfast. So I don't know how else to answer you, my friend. So yeah. All right, I think we're done. Some of these keep coming in. I see symbolic memes. Symbolic memes deserve that I look at his question. So symbolic memes for $5 says, how can perennialism become a religion if Ravek is religion? That's not a religion. Clearly states it's not a religion. With the cringe face. You're getting me into trouble with my friend there. So yeah, exactly. All right, guys. So thanks for your time, guys. I'm going to go. And so thanks for your attention, everybody. This has been the longest Q&A, I think, that I've ever done. And so thanks for attention. Thanks to Brad and to Jacob and to Lisa, who were there doing all the dirty work of working on all your comments. And so I really appreciate it. I will see you guys next month. There's this month's Patreon only video is going to come out, I hope, before the end of the month. I'm really working with Thomas from the Storytellers channels to get it edited. Actually, it's going to be a video on why the inverted pentagram is considered satanic. And so since I did that Montero video, I decided I'm going to add one more little thing to that, which is helping people understand why this particular image has kind of crystallized as a satanic image, and why that's a coherent thing that happened. And so everybody, thanks for your attention, and I will see you next month. Bye-bye.